Somewhere deep in the steamy rainforest of southern Mexico, a beautiful city sat quietly through the centuries, lost for 1,000 years. The Spanish conquistadors had missed it in their imperial stomp across the land, and the possessive jungle swallowed it from view. In the 18th century, rumors of stone houses in this area brought explorers to its reaches. When a Spanish army captain stumbled upon the actual site, so entranced was he that his accounts and sketches drew many more curiosity seekers to this spot, eventually called Palenque. In the 19th century, as the legend of this silent place grew, so did stories of its origins. It was the lost city of Atlantis, founded by Phoenicians or Egyptians, a colony of Rome. Named after a nearby village, Palenque rests on the edge of the Yucatan jungle in the Mexican state of Chiapas. It took the arduous journey of 2 intrepid men to debunk the myths of this late great city. The explorers, an American lawyer named John Lloyd Stevens, and an English artist named Frederick Catherwood, used lucid prose and detailed sketchings to show the world that this place of grace resembled nothing of European or Asian design. It was instead thoroughly original, built by an indigenous people, a people not yet extinct, called the Maya. The 2 men published a best-selling book in 1841 and lured a new crop of explorers to the area. "40 years later, a man named Alfred Maudsley, a former British diplomat, found himself on a different career path in a different world. While on a respite in Guatemala, Maudsley saw Maya sculptures for the first time. Of his reaction, he wrote, "It began to dawn upon me how more important were these monuments than any account I had heard of them led me to expect." And then he came upon Palenque. Like a brilliant white opal set against an emerald forest, Palenque flashes its jeweled splendor through the humid mist. Maudsley set up camp here to take down a fantastic history. In the heady days of Maya exploration that characterized the late 19th and early 20th centuries, abundant amounts of material were collected in photos, sketches, and diaries, especially at Palenque, evidence that would prove invaluable to future archaeologists who lost precious material to erosion and to looters. For his part, Alfred Maudsley's photos created a timeless portrait of Palenque, when time would not slow down. Palenque still astonishes. 10 or so buildings have been excavated over a half-square mile, elegant structures set against the backdrop of the Tabasco Plains. Built of limestone and stucco, they rest on grassy knolls and gentle hills in a forest clearing, perched here for some 1,300 years. Alfred Maudsley was prolific in his research. Armed with surveying equipment, a camera, plaster of Paris, and paper, Maudsley assembled astonishing records. He produced 16 volumes of work published over 13 years between 1889 and 1902. His matchless skill and diligence earned him the unofficial title of first modern archaeologist in the Maya field. His plaster casts were sent to London, molds that included the famous Maya glyphs. Picture symbols that tell 1,000 words and, as recently discovered, are also phonetic and pronounceable. But time has weathered these glyphs and softened their sharp detail. Fortunately, the casts taken by Maudsley were transferred to drawings, their enigmatic meaning preserved for posterity. For a long time, the glyphs proved elusive to those game enough to try and crack the code. With so little to go on, archaeologists of the early half of this century tried to portray the Maya as best they saw fit. The Maya were cast as peaceful agriculturalists with philosophical leanings, preoccupied with the large-scale passage of time. Their collection of stately buildings scattered throughout Central America were assumed to be simply ceremonial centers, usually empty, reserved for special occasions. The Maya, it was thought, could not have bothered with recording the minutiae of their lives, births and deaths, and their individuals of note. But the Maya of this picture were badly miscast. In the last 10 years, significant breakthroughs on the Maya glyphs have led to new theories. About 800 glyphs have been deciphered, and they draw a very different picture of who the Maya were, what they thought, their passion, privileges, and pageantry. The Maya lived in a collection of city-states that stretched from the lowlands of the Yucatan to the highlands of Guatemala. Though they were craftsmen of the highest order, blessed with skills and gifted technique, the Maya were also a fractious bunch. Their balkanized kingdoms produced intense rivalries that fed constant ritualized warfare. The Maya also loved history and believed in the cyclical nature of events. They recorded everything, telling their stories on the surfaces of stone and bark, tales of kings and princes, gods, myths, and battles. This is the prince called Chanbalum, or snake jaguar. The relief displays his accession rights. He is declared king on January 10 in the year 684 AD. Next to him, the celestial bird that sits atop the world tree, which rests itself above the water lily monster. Maudsley would never know the real story behind these reliefs. Even Maya scholars today believe they are a distorted mirror of events, bent to suit Maya interests. Though readable today, the message is a bit suspect. For it appears the Maya were never moved to record their off days. They only carved the stories that cast them in a favorable light, especially the king. These were images that justified their lineage or spoke grandly of their dynasties, their wars, and inevitable conquests. Much of it focused on the charisma of rulers and their daring do. We are looking then at images through the prism of propaganda, a device not entirely unfamiliar to modern civilization. Ritual guided the daily lives of the Maya. And from their rites, much blood flowed. Bloodletting was an essential part of Maya existence, used to mark every event of importance, from the births and deaths of kings, to the movements of the stars, to the change in agricultural seasons. Razor-sharp blades of obsidian would slice the flesh nicely. Royalty was not exempt from this practice. Indeed, kings regularly pierced their genitals with stingray spines, and queens pulled barbed rope through their tongues. The blood was dripped onto paper and delivered as a burnt offering to the gods. It was a messy, painful business, but one designed to open a window to the other world, to commune with spirits and ancestors. An entirely possible proposition, for it's thought that the resulting agony was so intense as to produce hallucinations. It's no wonder the ancient Maya have so gripped the popular imagination. They were a race entirely original and complex. Against the backdrop of sadomasochistic ritual, we must also juxtapose their lofty ideas about art and architecture, as evident in the maze-like palace at Palenque, complete with watchtower, or the ethereal presence of the lattice-combed roofs. It is to the good fortune of scholars today that even without the benefit of knowing the Maya character, Alfred Maudsley was sufficiently enthused by their legacy of limestone to photograph the structures at Palenque for future generations. Maudsley weathered stifling jungle heat and ferocious mosquitoes. He lugged weighty material and struggled with unwieldy camera equipment to capture priceless images. This is the Temple of the Cross, part of a trio of buildings built by Chanbalum in the 7th century. Inside are scenes depicting Chanbalum's right to accession as king. Similar images are found in here, the Temple of the Sun, also part of Chanbalum's triad. Though his pictures are irreplaceable, Maudsley's work was dramatically upstaged a half-century later by one of the great archaeological finds in history, inside the Temple of the Inscriptions. The story begins in the latter part of the 7th century. A great ruler of Palenque is feeling his age, and so orders the construction of his own coffin. He carefully inspects the work of his craftsmen, who are designing a coffin lid to his specifications. When finished, a 5-ton slab of stone will depict the king's journey into the underworld, with built-in symbols of resurrection. The casket of limestone will be placed 90 feet below a temple pyramid, the tomb of the greatest king who ruled Palenque. Pakal. He took the throne at age 12 and ruled until his death at 80. Bedecked in jewelry and royal finery at his funeral, Pakal also wore a burial mask of mosaic jade with eyes of black obsidian. No finer leader held sway at Palenque. Pakal's extraordinary public skills were matched only by his son, Chanbalum. Together, they saw Palenque through its golden age, the 7th century. Pakal provided Palenque some of its finest architecture and forged his kingdom into a reckonable state. These cowering slaves, carved on the wall of the palace courtyard, testify to the king's wieldy force. Pakal's body was taken to the Temple of Inscriptions and carried down a deep secret stairwell to his burial chamber. In 1949, archaeologist Alberto Rus discovered the stairs. It took 4 more years of digging to reach the vault. There, Rus encountered the skeletons of 4 men and a woman, victims of sacrifice. What the archaeologist saw next would render him speechless for some time. Pakal's tomb and the great carved lid of his sarcophagus. Later, Rus recalled his initial response. "Out of the dim shadows," he wrote, "emerged a vision from a fairy tale. A fantastic ethereal sight from another world. It seemed a huge magic grotto carved out of ice, the walls sparkling and glistening like snow crystals. The impression, in fact, was that of an abandoned chapel. Across the walls marched stucco figures in low relief." The great Pakal. He tried to ensure that his tomb would lie undisturbed for eternity, and simply let his stone images speak for him. He almost succeeded. For 1,000 years, he eluded explorers like Maudsley, who would return again and again to Palenque and other Maya sites. But Pakal, in all his wisdom, could not have estimated the tenacity and the curiosity of those so inspired by him and his kind. At Palenque, Copan, Tikal, Chichen Itza. Today, modern Maya explorers are confounded by one question: what happened to this great civilization? By 900 AD, the Maya world had collapsed. Their cities emptied, looted, and abandoned across Mesoamerica. Their intellectual achievements abruptly halted. Their downfall remains one of the great mysteries of history. Most scholars agree that the Maya were a fragile society who could have easily crumbled under a number of circumstances. They were overpopulated, their resources overtaxed. An agricultural disaster, a peasant's revolt, a king run amok. Any or all of these situations could have torn their societal web. Not all the Maya centers disintegrated. As Mesoamerica entered the time known as the post-classic age, a few cities and Maya outposts actually flourished. One was called Chichen Itza. The Maya here resembled little of their counterparts at Palenque or the other southern Maya states. And so they've piqued the archaeologists' interest, who want to know, why did these Maya survive while others fell? Chichen Itza sits on the limestone shelf that forms Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The culture here held dominance over vast parts of the region during the first centuries of the second millennium. Archaeologists called the Maya that lived here Itza. Their city's name, translated, means mouth of the well of the Itza. It refers to the fresh body of water near their settlement. The well is a cenote, a layer of limestone that collapsed on itself to create a basin of rainwater. Called the Well of Sacrifice, the cenote accepted precious offerings, including human lives. The history of Chichen Itza is as tangled as the thorny forest that surrounds it. Its chronology, still a matter of great debate. A traditional model holds that Chichen Itza hosted two major occupations. The first was pure Maya and lasted from 450 to 900 AD. The Maya resettled in 1100 AD, but were soon conquered by the Toltecs, a warlike tribe that dominated Mexico during the post-classic age. Part of that theory was gleaned, albeit cautiously, from the books of the Chilambalam, a volume of literature translated by the Spaniards and named after a Maya prophet. The books were a recorded history of different Yucatan communities. They speak of foreign incursions into native lowland territories, a fate assumed at Chichen Itza. But as valuable evidence, the books of the Chilambalam prove suspect. The chapters are clouded in metaphor, overblown conquests, and indecipherable glyphs. Their linkage to archaeological evidence remains, at this time, fairly weak. And so there is much room for historical interpretation at Chichen Itza. A new theory supposes something remarkably different, quite separate from the traditional mold. It says that Chichen Itza was always one city, continuously occupied, a Maya society with an international outlook that took on many Mexican attributes. This cosmopolitan group fused their indigenous Maya sensibilities with that of the Mexicans to produce a city thoroughly original in its art, architecture, and government. Chichen Itza presents a landscape of hodgepodge design. While some of its buildings show the mark of the Mexicans, others dazzle in Maya splendor. Here, the Maya rain god Choc, with his telltale nose, grips a corner of the nunnery, improbably named by the Spaniards. In fact, two gods played prominently at Chichen Itza, Choc from the Maya, and another named Quetzalcoatl, imported from the Mexicans and renamed Kukulkan in the Maya tongue. In the marketplace of ideas that characterizes Chichen Itza, it's not at all clear if these two gods from different origins had an easy time of it. Depending on the theory, Chichen Itza was a society overlapping with Maya, Mexican, Orthodox Maya, and liberal Maya tendencies. How their gods fused into a hybrid religion is still a matter open to interpretation. In Chichen Itza's early days, they may have struck an uneasy alliance or vied heavily for attention. Nonetheless, religion was pervasive, as was another theme. These murals, though tattered, still reveal the art of war, whose aim and consequences seem not to have rested with the defeat and humiliation of the enemy, but on their conscription instead into Chichen Itza society. Quite a departure from traditional Maya society, which was all too willing to do in its captives. The style of city government, too, appeared to break away from traditional Maya rule. Among the later art and architecture of Chichen Itza, there is no record of a dynasty of kings whose triumphs and lineages were recorded so dutifully in other Maya kingdoms. Instead, Chichen Itza refashioned that institution to better meet its own interests, which included the building and consolidation of an empire, a conquest state. The ancient glyphs of Chichen Itza imply that a group of lords, a brotherhood of princes, held sway over a domain they sought to extend through alliance, manipulation, and war. If the archaeological evidence continues to support this revised view of Chichen Itza, that it was a cosmopolitan city bent on joint rule rather than a Maya culture conquered by Mexicans, then we are facing a city with an entirely unique history to that of the rest of Mesoamerica. Chichen Itza becomes then a city with a new world view, prompted possibly by the quest to survive in a new world order. For Chichen Itza weathered the transition from the classic to the post-classic military age. It held its ground long after other cities had fallen in the 10th century. The ruling body here showed improvisational skills, an ability to adapt to a changing world, which may have insulated Chichen Itza from the political and economic storms that struck down its Maya neighbors in the south. It is at this point, however, that archaeologists proceed with caution. Because in addition to Chichen Itza resembling little of its Maya counterparts physically, it also recorded its history in very different ways. The Maya of the South were famous for their hieroglyphic inscriptions, picture symbols that told lucid stories of kings, their births, accessions, deaths, dynasties, wars, and victories. In contrast, the hieroglyphs of Chichen Itza prove more perplexing. Much of the text awaits decipherment. To complicate matters, as Chichen Itza grew older, bas-reliefs replaced hieroglyphs as the public art of choice. The specificity of events that so characterized the inscriptions at Palenque and other Maya sites eventually disappears from Chichen Itza's art. Dates of accession and the like are stricken from the record. The books of the Chalam Bilam muddle the issue further. They speak of warriors and legendary heroes at Chichen Itza, figures that so far remain remarkably absent from its art. And so it is from this point, from the post-classic era on, that the history of Chichen Itza must delve further into the realm of conjecture. The type of society that flourished at Chichen Itza presents a hazy picture to archaeologists, one revisited and contemplated countless times by top Maya scholars and researchers. Was it indeed a Maya city, conquered by Mexican Toltecs, or a revolutionary society, a fusion of Maya-Mexican sensibilities that pervaded throughout its history. Fortunately, some aspects of Chichen Itza reveal themselves quite clearly. On the walls that surround the ball court, a grim but familiar picture emerges. The mask of the god of death looks on at what's left of a decapitated victim. Spouting snakes from his neck symbolize blood, the unfortunate consequence for the loser in a ball game played for keeps. His head lies somewhere on the left in the hands of the winner. Similar images of death surround all the ball courts of Mesoamerica, whether it was Mexicans tearing out hearts or Maya slicing off heads. Much blood was shed over this mysterious sport. The exact nature of the game, its rules and traditions, remain elusive, lost to time, and today fall prey to a variety of contemporary myths. But the symbols and icons left behind speak of a highly ritualized, highly important event, full of pomp and sacrifice. What evolves from the available evidence is a game designed to replay the cycles of life, to put into expressive motion the glorious and tragic aspects of humanity. In that sense, the ball game served as a powerful metaphor for life and death, for victory and vanquish, for war. The sport resembled soccer in that hands were not allowed to touch the ball, but the objectives, the scoring, the positions played still prove puzzling. The principal ball court at Chichen Itza is the largest in all of Central America, about 1.5 times the size of a football field. In all, 8 ball courts cover the fields of the city. Near the ball court, a gruesome record of the losing side. This is the wall relief of the skull rack platform. Here, racks of skulls from sacrificial victims and captives of war were mounted on poles and gloriously displayed. Though the people of Chichen Itza subscribed to the same Maya notions of the ball game and sacrifice, it's now thought that their outlook on war departed from Maya tradition in several ways. Some evidence for that theory can be found at the Temple of the Warriors. Serpent heads guard the entrance. With their jaws agape, they strike a menacing pose. The temple is a colonnade, a series of columns that display an astonishing array of warriors dressed in full regalia, more than 200 figures in all. What is absolutely missing from this procession is a king. As in much of their later public art, the Itza seemed intent on purging themselves of a supreme ruler, a dynastic leader. As witnessed in the Temple of the Warriors, the emphasis falls on the group. It offers a celebration of collective conquest. In that sense, Chichen Itza breaks fundamentally from Maya art and thought. In other Maya cities, the king would be sure to claim credit for victories in battle, and the public art would subsequently reflect his contentions. modern archaeologist must wrestle with the question, if the people of Chichen Itza were, at their core, a Maya society, why would they reject such a powerful Maya concept as that of the dynastic king? Perhaps it was a necessary move. In the violent maelstrom that marked the transition between the classic and post-classic ages, it is possible that the society at Chichen Itza recognized the outdated and entrenched notion of the Maya dynasty. As the ritualized warfare of Maya city-states gave way to rampant infighting and anarchy, the Maya rulers and their inflexible governments could no longer maintain control. For them, it was business as usual in a world that had gone entirely awry, and so they simply collapsed. In contrast, the Itza, with their international outlook and broadened horizons, saw fit to adapt their government to a changing world. The Itza Maya were always different from their southern cousins. They were not the Renaissance types who relished in the artistic and intellectual pastimes of conventional Maya. They were more like merchants, canoe-farers, and international business types, more worldly wise than most Mesoamericans. And so, if they must take credit for such architectural duds as the Caracol, an unpretty temple assumed to be an observatory, then perhaps the Itza are also due praise for the improvisational skills they employed to survive the traumatic early centuries of the second millennium. Indeed, the society at Chichen Itza flourished long after other Maya cities fell. If we subscribe to the theory that Chichen Itza was Maya and not Mexican dominant, then Chichen Itza represents to the Maya their true grand finale. The capital established domain over large parts of the northern Yucatan and held its ground 300 years after the last of the traditional Maya kingdoms vanished. Even after the Itza abandoned their city at the end of the 12th century, they possessed a cultural endurance unmatched in Maya history. They resettled for a brief time in the western part of the peninsula until the mid-15th century. They managed to escape the grasp of Spanish conquerors until 1697. There is still much left to know about the Itza and their world. If in truth, Chichen Itza was always an essentially Maya capital, as the revised view postulates, then it changes once again the lens through which we see the Maya. From philosophical stargazers to bloodletting warriors, now to urban entrepreneurs, the Maya have undergone several incarnations in 20th century thought. There are sure to be more, as the Maya's complex character shows little signs of simplifying. Why Chichen Itza survived while other Maya cities fell will be a focal point of research for Maya scholars in the future. Much can still be learned about where the Itzas departed from traditional Maya thought and where they converged. For more than 1,000 years, a society of more than 50 city-states flourished in Mesoamerica, whose domain covered more than 100,000 square miles of rainforests and limestone plains. Theirs was an extraordinary evolution. Born as simple farmers, the Maya eventually grew into the grand intellectuals of their day. During their fantastic voyage, they developed a sophisticated numbering system, the concept of zero, and a highly accurate calendar. And through the centuries, they progressed entirely on their own. Completely isolated from the influence of Europe or Asia, not once did these societies meet except during the Spanish Conquista. The Maya, in fact, were a Stone Age people who worked without benefit of metal, wheel, or beast, but using the same kinds of tools as those used at Stonehenge, they built palaces both large and small. The Mayas were dedicated to matters of statecraft and the sacred world, at once flush with religious fever and sober with political acumen. Like modern men and women, the Maya suffered their existential woes. They wrestled with their place in the world, their earthly and spiritual purpose. And so they conjured up a place rich in ritual and myth to ease their anxieties and feed their creative souls. But above all, the Maya were writers, profoundly prolific, recording in near frenzied fashion their histories, their legends, and genealogies. It is an unspeakable tragedy that of the thousands and thousands of texts they wrote on delicate surfaces of fig bark, almost all turned to ash in the bonfires lit by Spanish missionaries. Time, too, has worn away the more enduring surfaces of Maya etchings and inscriptions. And then there is the untold damage performed by looters. The Maya are by no means extinct. Today, they number more than 6 million, dispersed in communities across southern Mexico and Central America. Their story, too, is a tragedy. Modern Maya face persecution and cultural isolation. The connections to their forebears have also been severed. Today, there is a movement afoot to teach the Maya the ancient hieroglyphs of their people and restore this piece of cultural heritage to its rightful place. And as the scholarly pursuit of Maya studies increases in intensity, perhaps history books will take note and devote chapters to this extraordinary race. Then the Maya will take their place alongside other ancient peoples of stellar accomplishments in Asia and in Europe.